In 1992, a farmer in Longyou County, China, decided to drain his pond. He'd been pumping water out of this pond for 17 days. His neighbours thought he was crazy. Why drain a perfectly good pond? But he kept going. The water kept dropping. And then, on June 9th, he saw something impossible. Stairs, cut into stone, leading down into darkness. He'd found a cave. But not just any cave. This was carved, shaped, deliberate. The walls had patterns chiselled into them. Pillars held up the ceiling. Someone had made this. Someone had spent years, maybe decades, hollowing out the bedrock beneath his pond. And here's the thing that makes this strange. This wasn't the only cave. They started draining other ponds in the area. 5 ponds total. Every single one had a cave underneath it. Massive caves. Some as large as 30,000 square feet. Ceilings 30 feet high. Pillars carved from the living rock. Walls covered in precise chisel marks, all angled at 60 degrees. But 5 caves wasn't the end of it. Ground-penetrating radar showed more. Many more. At least 36 caves total, maybe more. All connected by a network of tunnels, all carved with the same techniques, all showing the same patterns on the walls. Someone had removed nearly 1 million cubic meters of rock. That's roughly 36 million cubic feet of stone, chiselled out by hand, carried away, disposed of somewhere, and nobody wrote it down. There's no record of this project in any historical document, no mention in local histories, no legends passed down through generations, nothing in the official records of any Chinese dynasty. This is one of the largest construction projects in ancient history, and it's like it never happened. Think about what that means. This wasn't a quick job. Estimates suggest it took 1,000 workers about 6 years, or 100 workers about 60 years. Either way, this was a massive undertaking. People lived nearby. They must have seen it happening. They must have talked about it. But somehow nothing survived. No records, no stories, no explanation for why these caves exist. The caves themselves give almost no clues. There's no pottery inside, no tools left behind, no human remains, no inscriptions on the walls, just those precise chisel marks and the geometric patterns. Someone cleaned these caves thoroughly before they left, or maybe they never used them at all. The ponds above the caves aren't natural either. Someone built those too, probably to hide the entrances. Which raises another question. Why go through all that trouble to build something, only to hide it and never mention it again? This is where the mystery sits, not just in what the caves are, but in what they're not. They're not tombs, they're not mines, they're not storage, they're not temples, they're something else entirely, something nobody thought to write down, or something someone wanted forgotten. The first archaeologists who entered the caves couldn't believe what they were seeing. These weren't rough tunnels. These were architectural spaces. The walls curved gracefully. The pillars tapered as they rose. The ceiling followed natural contours of the rock but shaped deliberately. Someone had turned raw stone into something that felt designed. And the chisel marks. Everywhere. Millions of them. Every surface showed these marks, precise, angled at 60 degrees, about 2 inches long each. They covered the walls in patterns. Some areas had marks going one direction. Other areas had them crossing at angles. It looked almost decorative. But these weren't decorations, these were tool marks, evidence of how the stone was removed. Think about what that means. Someone didn't just hack away at the rock. They carved it systematically. Each strike of the chisel at the same angle. Each mark the same length. This took discipline. This took planning. This took time. The patterns on the walls make it even stranger. Some sections have what looks like fish carved into the stone, are the most impressive part. These aren't detailed art, more like symbols. But symbols of what? Nobody knows. The pillars are the most impressive part. These aren't added supports. They're carved from the bedrock itself. The workers left columns of stone standing as they excavated around them. Each pillar is about 3 feet square. They rise from floor to ceiling. Some caves have 5 pillars, others have 7, all evenly spaced, all carved with the same chisel marks. Here's what gets me about those pillars. They didn't need to be there. The caves could have been supported with wooden beams. That would have been easier, faster. But someone wanted stone pillars. Someone wanted permanence. This wasn't meant to be temporary. The size of these caves creates problems for every theory. Cave 1 is 30,000 square feet. That's bigger than most ancient temples. The ceiling reaches 30 feet high in some places. The floor is level. The walls are vertical. This isn't a natural cave that was modified. This is completely artificial space carved from solid rock. And they made 36 of them, maybe more. Ground-penetrating radar shows the caves connect underground. Tunnels link them together. Some tunnels are wide enough to walk through. Others are narrow passages. The whole complex forms a network beneath the modern town. Houses sit on top of it. Roads cross over it. People live their lives directly above this massive hollow space. Nobody noticed until 1992. That's what makes this truly bizarre. This is one of the largest construction projects in ancient history. It's been sitting under a Chinese town for at least 2,000 years, possibly much longer, and it was completely forgotten. Not just forgotten, it's like it never existed in the first place. The stone that was removed had to go somewhere. That's almost 1 million cubic meters of rock. If you piled it up, it would make a hill 300 feet tall. You can't hide that. You can't make it disappear. Someone moved it, loaded it onto carts or boats, transported it away, used it for something, or dumped it somewhere. But where? Archaeologists have looked. No massive stone piles in the area. No ancient construction projects that use that much stone. No quarries nearby that show evidence of receiving excavated rock. The stone just vanished, unless it was dumped in the river. The Q River runs near the caves. If workers loaded the stone onto boats and dumped it downstream, it would scatter, sink, disappear into the riverbed. That could explain why there's no trace, but it seems wasteful. Carved stone has value. Why not use it? The effort required to build these caves is staggering. Archaeologists estimate different numbers. Some say 1,000 workers for 6 years. Others say 100 workers for 60 years. Either way, this dominated someone's economy. This required feeding workers, housing them, paying them, organizing them, managing the project. That kind of effort leaves evidence. Workers need tools. Tools break. Tools get lost. Workers need food. Food creates waste. Pottery. Animal bones. Trash pits. Workers need shelter. That means buildings, fire pits, living spaces. All of this should leave archaeological traces, but there's nothing. No tool marks except those on the cave walls. No pottery fragments. No food waste. No evidence of a work camp. No signs of the infrastructure needed to support this project. It's like the workers appeared, carved the caves, and vanished without leaving a trace. The cleaning bothers researchers. These caves are empty. Not just empty of objects, empty of dust, empty of debris, empty of the natural accumulation you'd expect from 2,000 years of sitting unused. Someone swept them, cleaned them thoroughly, removed everything, then sealed them under ponds. Why do that? If these were tombs, you'd leave grave goods. If these were storage, you'd store things. If these were temples, you'd leave religious objects. If these were mines, you'd abandon your tools. But these caves have nothing. They're blank spaces, waiting for something that never came. The ponds above the caves aren't accidents. Someone built those ponds. dug them, lined them, filled them with water. The ponds sit directly over the cave entrances. That's not coincidence. The ponds were meant to hide the caves, to seal them, to keep them secret. But secret from who? If this was a government project, why hide it from the government? If this was a private project, why make it so large? If this was a military project, why leave no weapons? If this was a religious project, why leave no shrines? Every answer creates new questions. Every theory falls apart when you look closely. These caves don't fit any category. They're too big to be hidden, too empty to be useful, too well made to be abandoned, too clean to be forgotten. The local government has tried to make them a tourist attraction. They've installed lights in some caves, built walkways, put up signs. But the signs can't explain what the caves are for. They just describe what's there. Stone, pillars, chisel marks, patterns. The signs avoid the real question. Why do these exist? Some caves are still flooded. Nobody has drained them yet. Maybe they contain clues. Maybe they're empty like the others. The Chinese government has been slow to excavate further. Maybe they're waiting for better technology. Maybe they're worried about what they'll find, or what they won't find. The mystery deepens when you realize this area has been inhabited for thousands of years. People lived here during the Han Dynasty, the Tang Dynasty, the Song Dynasty. All of these periods kept detailed records. They wrote about everything: battles, taxes, floods, droughts, construction projects, everything except these caves. How do you hide something this big? How do you keep it secret across dynasties? How do you prevent workers from talking? How do you erase it from collective memory? These aren't small questions. These are fundamental problems with every theory. The caves are still there, still empty, still waiting for an explanation that makes sense. Tourists walk through them now, taking photos, marveling at the scale, wondering what they're looking at. The caves don't answer. They just sit in the darkness, keeping their secrets, refusing to give up the truth about why they exist. If you're liking the content, please like the video. Also subscribe and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Your support motivates me to dig deeper into our ancient mysteries, back to Longyou. Because here's where the engineering becomes truly impossible. These caves shouldn't exist, not just because there's no record, because the physics don't work. The weight above these chambers should have crushed them thousands of years ago. But they're still standing, still solid, still defying everything we know about stone and stress and time. Look at the walls more closely, not just what's carved there, how it's carved. Every chisel mark follows a system. The workers didn't just chip away randomly. They had a method, a technique, and that technique tells us something important about who did this. The marks are uniform, 2 inches long, always at that 60-degree angle. This means the workers use the same tools, the same motion, the same training. You don't get that kind of consistency by accident. You get it through practice, through instruction, through doing the same movement thousands of times until your body knows it without thinking. Archaeologists call this a tool signature. It's like handwriting. Each culture develops specific ways of working stone, the angle of the chisel, the length of each strike, the pattern of removal. These details reveal who made something and when. But here's the problem. This tool signature doesn't match anything else in Chinese history. The Han Dynasty workers chiseled differently. The Qin Dynasty workers had their own techniques. Every period left its mark in stone. Literally. We can look at ancient stonework and identify when it was made based on these patterns. The Longyou marks don't fit anywhere. They're unique, which means either this was done during a period we haven't identified yet, or the workers came from somewhere we haven't considered. Let's talk about the actual tools. What made these marks? Bronze tools would leave different traces than iron. Stone tools would create different patterns than metal. The marks in Longyou suggest metal chisels, probably bronze. The edges are too clean for stone tools, too precise. Bronze chisels were common in ancient China, but they wear down quickly when working hard rock. You'd need to resharpen them constantly, or replace them. For a project this size, you'd go through hundreds of chisels, maybe thousands. Where are they? Where are the discarded tools? The broken ones? The worn-down ones? Nobody's found them. Not in the caves. Not in the surrounding area. Not anywhere. Here's what makes the tool marks even stranger. They show no evolution, no learning curve. When humans start a new technique, you can see them getting better. Early work is rough, experimental. Later work becomes refined, efficient. You can literally watch skills develop through the archaeological record, not here. The first marks are just as precise as the last ones. The technique was already perfected when they started, which means they'd done this before, somewhere else. But where? Some researchers think the workers came from southern China, different region, different traditions. That would explain why the technique doesn't match northern Chinese methods. Others think this was done by a specialized group. Stoneworkers who travelled from project to project. Professional excavators who kept their techniques secret. But both theories have problems. If these workers came from somewhere else, why don't we see this technique anywhere else? If they were professionals, where are the other projects they worked on? The chisel marks also tell us about timing, how long this took. Modern stonemasons can estimate work time based on tool marks. They look at the density of strikes, the depth of each mark, the total surface area. Then they calculate backward. For Longyou, the estimates are staggering. Even with hundreds of workers, this would take decades, maybe a century, maybe more. That's a lot of chiseling, a lot of workers, a lot of coordination, and somehow nobody wrote it down. But there's another detail in these marks, something subtle, something that changes everything we think we know about the project. The marks aren't all the same age. Look carefully at different sections. Some marks show more weathering than others. Some edges are sharper. Some are more rounded. The difference is slight, but it's there. This suggests the caves weren't carved all at once. They were carved in phases, over a long period, maybe centuries. That changes the whole picture. This wasn't one massive project. This was an ongoing effort, generation after generation, workers coming back, adding more, expanding. But why? What would drive people to keep carving for centuries? Some caves show evidence of modification. Later workers came back and changed things, added details, expanded chambers, refined surfaces. You can see it in the tool marks, different layers, different techniques. Not dramatically different, but enough to suggest different hands, different time periods. This makes the missing records even more puzzling. If this went on for centuries, someone should have written about it. Multiple dynasties should have mentioned it. But there's nothing, unless the records existed and were deliberately destroyed, unless someone wanted this forgotten. The patterns on the walls add another layer to this mystery. Those fish, those birds, those horses, they're not random decoration, they're placed deliberately in specific locations, at specific heights. Some researchers think they're clan markers, different groups working different sections, each leaving their symbol, like a signature. Others think they're directional markers, navigation aids in the darkness. Follow the fish to the exit. Follow the birds to the water source. But here's what nobody can explain. Why are some symbols upside down? Why are some backward? If these are markers, they should be consistent. They should make sense. These don't. These symbols also appear at different depths in the rock. Some are carved deep. Some are barely scratched into the surface. This suggests different purposes, or different time periods, or both. One cave has a symbol that looks like a boat. It's carved high on the wall, about 20 feet up. Why would you carve a boat 20 feet up a cave wall? Unless the water level was higher when it was carved. Unless these caves flooded regularly. That opens another possibility. Maybe these weren't always dry. Maybe they were underwater for part of the year. Maybe the workers only carved during certain seasons when the water was low. That would explain why the project took so long. You can't carve underwater. You'd have to wait for the water to recede. Work for a few months, then stop when it flooded again. But the caves don't show flood damage. The marks are too crisp, too clean. Water erosion would smooth them, round the edges. These edges are still sharp, so either the flooding theory is wrong or the caves were sealed somehow. Protected from water. But how? The tool marks also show something about lighting. The workers needed to see what they were doing. You can't chisel precisely in total darkness. Torch marks on the ceiling confirm they used fire for light. But fire in enclosed spaces creates problems. Smoke, heat, lack of oxygen. The deeper you go, the worse it gets. This means they needed ventilation, air shafts, some way to bring fresh air in and push smoke out, but we haven't found obvious air shafts. The cave seems sealed. Maybe the shafts were filled in later. Maybe they collapsed. Maybe they're hidden. Or maybe the workers had a different solution we haven't thought of. Every detail raises more questions. The uniform marks suggest organization. The varied weathering suggests centuries. The symbols suggest meaning. The lack of record suggests secrecy. And through it all, those chisel marks, millions of them, each one a moment of human effort, each one a strike of metal on stone, each one bringing the workers closer to something we still don't understand. What were they building? What were they hiding? What were they protecting? The marks can't tell us that. But they tell us this. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They had skills. They had tools. They had time. They had purpose. And then they vanished, leaving nothing but marks in stone. Evidence of effort without explanation. Work without record. Mystery carved into bedrock. Now let's talk about what isn't there. 1 million cubic meters of rock. Gone. Removed. Carried away. That's the volume of stone that came out of these caves. Where is it? This is the question nobody can answer. And it's not a small question. We're talking about 36 million cubic feet of rock. Imagine a pyramid. Now imagine it's made entirely of the stone removed from Longyou. It would be massive, visible for miles. You couldn't hide it, but there's no trace of it. None. No piles of rubble nearby. No ancient quarry waste. No stone chips in the soil. No fragments in the river. Nothing. Archaeologists have searched the entire area. They've used ground-penetrating radar. They've dug test pits. They've analysed soil samples. The stone is just gone. This creates a huge problem for dating the caves. Here's why. When you excavate stone, you create debris. Lots of it. For every cubic metre of finished cave, you might produce 2 cubic metres of waste. Chips, dust, broken pieces, failed cuts. This waste has to go somewhere. Usually ancient builders just dumped it nearby. Why carry it far? Stone is heavy. The easier solution is to pile it close to the work site, but not here. Someone hauled away millions of tons of rock, or hid it so well we can't find it 2,000 years later. Let's think about the logistics. How do you move 1 million cubic meters of stone? You need carts, or boats, or thousands of workers carrying baskets. You need roads or rivers. You need organization. You need time. And you need a reason. Why bother? Why not just pile it up outside the caves? Some researchers think the stone was valuable. Maybe they used it for building, cut it into blocks, shaped it for construction. That would explain why they hauled it away. But there's a problem with this theory. The rock from Longyou is sandstone. It's not great building material. It's soft. It weathers quickly. Ancient Chinese builders preferred harder stone for important structures. So if they weren't using it for building, what did they do with it? Another theory suggests they dumped it in the river. The Q River runs near the caves. Maybe they loaded the stone onto boats, floated it downstream, dumped it in deep water. But rivers move, currents shift, stones settle in patterns. You should be able to find evidence of massive dumping. Underwater surveys have found nothing. A third theory is darker. Maybe they didn't remove the stone at all. Maybe it's still there, buried, hidden deliberately. This theory suggests the caves were filled in after they were built, packed with the same stone that came out, then sealed, then forgotten. Later, natural processes or human activity removed the fill. The caves became empty again, but nobody remembered they existed. It's possible, but it raises more questions than it answers. Why fill them in? Why hide them? What were they protecting? The missing stone also affects how we estimate the timeline. Here's the math. Modern stonemasons can remove about 1 cubic metre of rock per day. That's with good tools, good lighting, good ventilation. 1 person, 1 day, 1 cubic metre. The Longyou caves contain 1 million cubic metres. If 1 person worked alone, it would take 1 million days. That's 2,740 years. Obviously more than 1 person worked on this. But how many? Let's say 100 workers. That's still 27 years, and that assumes they worked every single day. No breaks, no winters, no floods, no wars, just constant chiselling for nearly 3 decades. More realistic estimates suggest several hundred workers over many decades, maybe a century, maybe more. All those workers chipping away at stone, all that debris piling up, all those baskets being carried out, for decades, and nobody wrote about it. Nobody recorded it. Nobody mentioned it in passing. The silence is as mysterious as the missing stone. But there's another aspect to this mystery. The stone that's missing isn't just random rock. It's specific stone, from specific layers. The caves cut through different types of sandstone. Some layers are red, some are yellow, some are grey. Each layer has different properties, different hardness, different grain. The workers removed all these layers. They didn't pick and choose. They carved straight through, which means the debris would have been mixed, different colours, different types, all jumbled together. That kind of mixed stone waste is distinctive. It should be easy to spot. But it's not anywhere. Some researchers have looked at nearby structures, ancient walls, old buildings, foundations. Could the stone have been reused there? The problem is timing. Most nearby structures are from known periods. We can date them. They don't match the estimated age of the caves, and their stone doesn't match the Longyou sandstone. So the stone didn't go into local buildings. It didn't get dumped in the river. It's not piled nearby. Where is it? One possibility that nobody likes to consider. Maybe our volume estimates are wrong. Maybe the caves aren't as old as we think. Maybe they were carved more recently. Maybe the stone was removed with better technology, faster methods, more efficient transport. But this creates new problems. If the caves are recent, why don't we have records? Recent history is well documented. You can't hide a massive excavation project in the last few centuries. The tool marks argue against recent construction anyway. They match ancient techniques, not modern ones. Another angle, maybe the stone was valuable for something we haven't considered. Ancient Chinese culture valued certain stones for specific purposes. Jade for ritual objects, specific rocks for medicine. Some stones were ground into powder for pigments. Could the Longyou sandstone have been valuable for something? Something worth the effort of hauling it away? There's no evidence for this. But there's no evidence against it either. We just don't know. The missing stone connects to another mystery. The cave entrances. How did they get the stone out? The openings we see today are relatively small. Some are just a few feet wide. You couldn't move massive amounts of rock through those openings efficiently. This suggests the original entrances were larger, much larger, big enough to move stone quickly, big enough for carts or sleds. But if the entrances were larger, where are they? Were they sealed deliberately? Did they collapse? Were they hidden? Some caves show evidence of modification around the entrance. Later stonework, different techniques. This suggests the entrances were changed after the main excavation was complete. Why would you seal up the entrances? Why make them smaller? Unless you wanted to hide what was inside. Unless you wanted people to forget these caves existed. The missing stone might be the key to everything. Find the stone, and you might find records of who moved it. Find records, and you might identify who built the caves. Identify the builders, and you solve the mystery. But the stone is gone, vanished as completely as the records, leaving us with empty caves and empty archives, 1,000,000 cubic meters of absence, evidence of work without evidence of workers, proof of effort without proof of purpose. The stone was here, then it wasn't, and in that disappearance lies a secret that's lasted thousands of years. Let's talk about something that makes engineers uncomfortable. The caves at Longyou are structurally impossible. Not impossible like, we don't know how they did it. Impossible like, this shouldn't be standing. The rock above these chambers weighs thousands of tons. Sandstone is relatively soft. It compresses under pressure. It cracks. It crumbles. Over time, the weight should cause collapse. But these caves are still here. After 2,000 years, maybe longer. The pillars help. Obviously, they support the ceiling. But here's the thing, the pillars are too thin. They're about 3 feet square. That's not enough surface area to distribute the load properly. Modern engineering calculations show the pillars should have failed. The stone should have cracked. The ceiling should have come down centuries ago. But it didn't. Structural engineers have studied this extensively. They've measured the dimensions, calculated the weight, analysed the stress points. Their conclusion? These caves violate modern understanding of stone mechanics. The ceiling thickness varies between 3 and 6 feet. That's the layer of rock between the cave roof and the surface above. In some spots, it's barely 3 feet thick. 3 feet of sandstone supporting the weight of earth and water and vegetation for thousands of years. Without reinforcement, without collapse, this shouldn't work. Let's compare this to other ancient underground structures. The Roman catacombs had thicker ceilings. Egyptian tombs were carved into harder stone. Turkish underground cities used natural rock formations for support. All those structures followed basic engineering principles: thick ceilings, strong pillars, careful placement of load-bearing walls. Longyou doesn't follow these rules. The builders created vast open spaces with minimal support. They carved away rock that should have been left for stability. They made choices that defy logic. Unless they knew something we don't. The angle of the walls might be the key. They're not vertical. They slope slightly inward as they rise. This creates a subtle arch effect. The walls lean toward each other. This distributes weight differently than straight vertical walls. It's clever, really clever. But is it enough? Engineers aren't sure. The slope is subtle, maybe 5 degrees, that's not much of an arch. Traditional arches need more curve to work properly, but maybe that's the point. Maybe this isn't a traditional arch. Maybe it's something else. Some principle of weight distribution we haven't fully understood yet. The chisel marks play a role too. Remember those precise marks, all at 60 degrees? They're not just decorative, they create texture on the walls. Texture matters in stone structures. Smooth walls can develop stress cracks more easily. Textured surfaces distribute stress across more area. The chisel marks might actually strengthen the walls. This suggests the builders understood material science. They knew how stone behaves under pressure. They knew how to work with its properties instead of against them. But where did they learn this? Who taught them? There's no evidence of experimental caves, no practice runs, no failed attempts. The Longyou caves appear fully developed. The techniques are sophisticated from the start. This is strange. Usually you see progression. Early attempts are crude. Later work improves. You can trace the learning curve through the archaeology. Not here. These caves show mastery from day one. The water makes it even more impressive. Remember, these caves were flooded, filled with water for who knows how long. Water is heavy. It adds tremendous pressure to the walls and ceiling. Water also erodes stone. It seeps into cracks. It freezes and expands. It carries minerals that eat away at rock. Underground structures filled with water usually deteriorate quickly, but Longyou's caves are in good condition. The walls are solid. The pillars are intact. There's erosion, sure, but not the catastrophic damage you'd expect. How did the builders waterproof these spaces? Or did they even try? Maybe the design itself prevents water damage somehow. The drainage is interesting. The floors slope towards specific points. Water would naturally flow to these low spots. From there it could drain through cracks or channels into the bedrock below. This suggests the builders planned for flooding. They knew water would get in. They designed the caves to handle it. That's sophisticated thinking. That's engineering beyond basic carving. Let's talk about the connections between caves. Ground-penetrating radar shows tunnels, passages linking different chambers. Some are natural cracks in the rock. Others appear deliberately carved. These connections create a network, not just isolated caves, a system. This raises the structural complexity considerably. When you connect underground spaces, you create new stress points. The rock between chambers becomes a load-bearing wall. If that wall fails, multiple caves could collapse. But the walls between caves are thin, sometimes just 15 feet of rock separating massive chambers. That's not much, especially in soft sandstone, yet they're holding, all of them. No collapses detected. The cave entrances present another engineering puzzle. They're at different elevations. Some are near the surface, others are deeper. This suggests multiple levels of excavation. Creating entrances at different heights is tricky. You have to maintain structural integrity as you dig. You can't just punch holes wherever you want. Each opening weakens the overall structure. The builders placed entrances carefully, always in spots where the rock above could handle the loss of material, always where the opening wouldn't compromise nearby chambers. This takes planning, serious planning. You need to visualize the entire structure in 3 dimensions. You need to understand how removing stone in one place affects stability everywhere else. Modern engineers use computer models for this. They simulate stress and load distribution. They test different configurations virtually before building anything. The Longyou builders had none of that. They worked with experience and intuition, and somehow got it right. The ventilation is another mystery. These caves are deep underground. Air doesn't circulate naturally in sealed spaces. Without airflow, workers would suffocate. The air would become toxic from their breath and from lamps burning. But the caves have ventilation shafts. Small channels lead into the surface, positioned to create airflow through the chambers. This is advanced thinking. This shows understanding of air movement, of pressure differences, of how to keep underground spaces breathable. Who figured this out? How many workers died before they got it right? The thermal properties are remarkable too. Underground spaces maintain constant temperature. The rock insulates against surface weather. In summer, caves stay cool. In winter, they stay warm. But Longyou's caves seem especially stable. Temperature measurements show very little variation. The humidity stays constant. The air quality remains good. This makes them useful for storage, for shelter, for any purpose requiring controlled environment. Was this intentional? Did the builders understand they were creating climate-controlled spaces? The acoustic properties are weird. Sound behaves strangely in these caves. Some chambers echo, others absorb sound. Voices carry differently. Depending on where you stand, this might be accidental, or it might be deliberate. Some researchers think certain chambers were designed for acoustic effect, for ceremonies, for music, for speaking to assembled groups. There's no way to prove this. But the variation in acoustic properties between chambers suggests intentional design. The precision of the carving supports this theory. These builders controlled every detail. They shaped the space deliberately. Why wouldn't they consider sound? Here's what really bothers engineers. The margin for error was tiny. One mistake could have been catastrophic. Remove too much stone in the wrong place. Collapse. Cut a pillar too thin. Failure. Misjudge the ceiling thickness. Disaster. But there's no evidence of failure. No collapsed sections. No emergency repairs. No signs that anything went wrong during construction. Either they were incredibly lucky, or they knew exactly what they were doing. And if they knew, where did that knowledge come from? Who taught them to carve massive chambers in soft stone without modern engineering tools? These caves represent a level of technical sophistication that shouldn't exist. Not in ancient China, not anywhere, not without written records, not without a tradition of similar structures, but here they are, standing, solid, defying explanation. The engineering is impossible, but the caves are real, which means our understanding of what's possible needs updating. Something's missing from this picture. Some piece of knowledge, some technique, some understanding that's been lost. The caves are proof it existed, but the proof doesn't tell us what it was. Here's what nobody talks about when they discuss these caves. The silence. Not the silence now, the silence then, during construction. Think about what it takes to carve a cave. You hit stone with a chisel, over and over. Each strike makes noise, a sharp crack. The sound echoes off rock walls, it bounces, it amplifies. Now, multiply that by thousands of workers, thousands of chisels, striking stone simultaneously, for years. The noise would have been deafening, but there's no record of it. Nobody complained, nobody mentioned it. No local histories talk about the constant hammering coming from beneath the ground. This seems impossible. Ancient people wrote about everything. They recorded floods, droughts, famines, wars, construction projects, especially big ones. The Great Wall gets mentioned constantly. Temple construction appears in dozens of documents. Even minor building projects made it into local records. But not this. Not the largest excavation in ancient Chinese history. The silence in the historical record is absolute. Chinese record-keeping was exceptional. They documented everything: tax records, census data, weather patterns, astronomical events, the position of every government official, the price of rice in different provinces. They kept these records for thousands of years. Many still exist. We can read them today, but nowhere in any of these documents does anyone mention carving giant caves in Longyou County. Let's think about what should be recorded. A project this size needs workers, lots of them. Where do they come from? Were they slaves, conscripts, volunteers, paid labourers? Someone had to organise them, feed them, house them, pay them or control them. This creates a paper trail, or should. Work assignments, food distribution, payment records, something, but there's nothing. The tools alone should appear somewhere. You need thousands of bronze chisels. Someone made them, someone sold them, someone transported them to the work site. Bronze was valuable, controlled by the state. You couldn't just buy unlimited bronze tools without someone noticing. The Han Dynasty kept detailed records of bronze production. We know how much they made, where it went, what it was used for. None of it mentions Longyou. The Qin Dynasty before them was even more obsessive about records. They documented everything, every nail, every brick, every worker on every project. Still nothing about these caves. What about accidents? A project this dangerous must have killed people. Cave-ins, falls, injuries from tools, workers dying from bad air or exhaustion. Ancient China recorded deaths, especially deaths during state projects. They kept lists, they noted causes, they tracked numbers, but no death records mention Longyou cave construction. Food consumption should show up somewhere. Thousands of workers need to eat, daily, for years. Where did the food come from? How was it transported? Who paid for it? Large construction projects in ancient China required massive food supplies. Rice, vegetables, meat, salt, oil. These supplies came from somewhere. Someone grew the food. Someone moved it. Someone cooked it. This should appear in agricultural records, in transport logs, in local histories. It doesn't. The waste disposal is another mystery. Not just the stone, human waste. Thousands of workers produce a lot of waste. Where did it go? Ancient sites show evidence of this. Latrines, waste pits, contaminated soil. We can find these traces thousands of years later. Not at Longyou. The area around the caves shows no evidence of large-scale human occupation during construction. Water supply should be documented too. Workers need water, lots of it, both for drinking and for the work itself. You can't chip stone all day without water. The dust alone would kill you. Workers need to drink, to wash, to cool down. Large water consumption leaves traces, wells, cisterns, channels, something. But there's no evidence of unusual water infrastructure near the caves. Nothing that suggests thousands of people working here for decades. Local legends should exist. Even if official records are lost, people tell stories. They pass them down through generations. Every major construction project in China has legends attached to it. The Great Wall has hundreds, the Forbidden City, the Grand Canal, all have stories about their construction, workers who died, ghosts who haunted the sites, miraculous events during building, curses, blessings, something. Longyou has no legends. The local people seemed genuinely surprised when the caves were discovered. They didn't have stories about ancient construction. They didn't know the caves existed. This is weird. Really weird. Compare this to other mysterious sites. Stonehenge has legends going back centuries. The pyramids appear in countless ancient texts. Even smaller sites have oral traditions. But Longyou? Nothing. Complete blank. The naming is strange too. When the caves were discovered, they had to create names for them. Nobody knew what to call them. There were no traditional names passed down. If these caves were used for anything important, they'd have names. Temples have names. Tombs have names. Storage facilities have names. Everything has a name. These caves were just numbered. Cave 1. Cave 2. Like they'd never been named before. Religious records are another dead end. If these were temples, religious texts should mention them. Priests would record ceremonies. Pilgrims would write about visits. If these were tombs, burial records should exist. Family histories, genealogies, something noting who was buried where. Nothing. If they were storage, inventory records should exist. What was stored? How much? When was it moved in or out? Still nothing. Military records are silent too. If these were defensive structures, military documents should mention them. Strategic planning, garrison assignments, supply caches. The Chinese military kept detailed records. We know where troops were stationed, what fortifications existed, how they were used. Longyou doesn't appear anywhere. Trade records show nothing either. If these caves were used for commerce, merchants would record it. Goods stored here, transactions made, taxes paid. Ancient. China taxed everything. They recorded every transaction. We can trace trade routes across the empire, but no trade records mention Longyou. Census data is equally blank. The Chinese conducted regular censuses. They counted people, noted where they lived, what they did. If thousands of workers lived near Longyou during construction, the census should show a population spike. More people in the area, more households, more activity. The census data shows nothing unusual. Population levels stayed normal. No spike, no influx of workers. It's like the project never happened. Astronomical records are incredibly detailed from this period. Chinese astronomers noted everything. Eclipses, comets, planetary movements, weather patterns. These records are precise, dated, cross-referenced with other events. You'd think someone would mention the caves in passing. In the year of the Great Comet, work continued on the underground chambers. Something like that. But no, the astronomical records never mention Longyou. Tax records should show something. A project this size costs money. Someone paid for it. Either the state or wealthy individuals. Large expenditures appear in tax records. We can track spending on other projects, see where money went, who authorized it. Longyou doesn't show up in any financial records. The bureaucracy should have recorded this. Ancient China had layers of officials. Each level kept records. Each office documented its activities. These bureaucratic records overlap. Multiple offices recording the same events from different angles. This creates redundancy, makes it hard to lose information. But somehow, every level of bureaucracy missed this project, or chose not to record it. That's the thing that bothers researchers most. The silence isn't just one missing document, it's systematic, complete. Every type of record that should mention these caves is blank. One missing document is understandable. Records get lost, destroyed, forgotten. But all of them, every category of record, every level of government, every type of documentation, that's not accident. That's either deliberate erasure or something we don't understand about when this happened. Some researchers think the caves predate Chinese record keeping. Maybe they're older than we think. Before the dynasties, before written history. But the construction techniques argue against this. The tools used were metal, probably bronze. That puts it within the historical period. Others think the records existed but were deliberately destroyed. Maybe the project was secret, maybe it was shameful, maybe someone wanted it forgotten. But destroying records is hard, especially in ancient China. Records were copied, stored in multiple locations, preserved carefully. You'd have to find every copy, every reference, every mention, and destroy them all. That takes organization, power, motivation. Why bother? What about these caves were so important to hide? The silence extends to the neighbouring regions too. Longyou wasn't isolated. It was connected to trade routes, other provinces, other cultures. Travellers should have seen this construction. Merchants passing through. Officials on government business. Someone from outside the area. But no records from neighbouring provinces mention it either. No travellers' account. No merchant's log. No diplomatic correspondence. It's like the entire region agreed to never speak of it. The geological records are the only things that talk. The stone itself, the tool marks, the structure. These tell us it happened, but they don't tell us when, or who, or why, and they certainly don't explain the silence. Here's what bothers me about the labour question. Not who built these caves, but how they stayed quiet. Ancient construction projects had thousands of workers. Those workers had families, children, neighbours, friends. They talked. People always talk. A man comes home after working underground all day. His wife asks what he did. He tells her. She mentions it to her sister. The sister tells her husband. Word spreads. That's how information moves in small communities. Through conversation, through gossip, through everyday life. But somehow this project stayed secret, or got forgotten so completely it's like it never existed. Let's think about the workers themselves. What kind of person chipped stone underground for years? Skilled labourers would have been expensive. They'd need training, experience. Someone would have to teach them that specific 60-degree angle technique. Training programs leave traces. Master craftsmen, apprentices, guild records, something. But there's no evidence of specialised training for this type of work. No other sites in China show the same technique. These workers appeared, did this job, then vanished. Maybe they used unskilled labour, prisoners, slaves, conscripts. But unskilled workers can't create the precision we see here. Those uniform chisel marks, those perfectly spaced pillars, that careful attention to structural integrity. You need skilled hands for that. Experienced hands. The work schedule is another puzzle. Did they work year-round or seasonally? Agricultural societies work around planting and harvest. Most ancient construction happened during the off-season, when farmers had free time. But this project would take decades. You can't do it with seasonal labour alone. You'd need a permanent workforce. Where did they live? Thousands of workers need housing, shelter, protection from weather. Temporary camps would leave evidence, post holes, fire pits, trash heaps, worn paths. Permanent structures would leave even more. Stone foundations, drainage ditches, wells. The area around Longyou shows nothing. No evidence of mass habitation during any historical period that matches the cave construction. It's like the workers commuted from somewhere else. But where and how? The nearest major city was days away by foot. You can't walk days to work and back every night. Health is another issue nobody addresses. Working underground is dangerous, not just from cave-ins, from the air itself. Stone dust fills your lungs. You breathe it constantly. It accumulates. It kills slowly. Modern stone workers wear masks. Ancient workers had nothing. They just breathed the dust. After years of this work, many would develop lung problems, coughing, weakness, early death. These health problems would be visible. The community would notice. People would talk about the sick workers, the ones who couldn't breathe right. But there's no mention of this in local medical records. No pattern of respiratory disease in the area. Either the workers came from somewhere else and left when they got sick, or this happened so long ago we've lost all trace of it. This social structure puzzles me too. Someone organised this. Someone gave orders. Someone enforced discipline. Large projects need hierarchy, foremen, supervisors, managers. Someone making sure the work gets done right. These people would have status, recognition. They'd appear in local records. Their families would remember them, pass down stories about great-grandfather who supervised the cave project. But nobody's family has these stories. Nobody claims ancestors who worked on this. The payment system is invisible too. How did workers get compensated? If they were paid, where did the money come from? State treasury, private wealth, taxes. Ancient China tracked financial transactions carefully. We can see payment records for other projects, amounts, recipients, dates, nothing for Longyou. If they weren't paid, what motivated them? Religious devotion, civic duty, force. Each motivation leaves different evidence. Religious projects have temple records. Civic projects have government documents. Forced labour shows up in complaint records or rebellion accounts. We see none of this. The coordination required is massive. Different caves, needed to align underground. Tunnels had to meet. Pillars had to be placed correctly. This needs surveying, planning, communication between different work crews. How did they coordinate without modern tools? No GPS, no precise measuring equipment, no radios to communicate between crews. They must have used something. Plumb lines, water levels, measuring ropes, careful calculation. But these techniques would be recorded, passed down, used on other projects. We don't see this surveying method anywhere else in Chinese history. The timing of work shifts matters too. You can't have thousands of people working in confined spaces simultaneously. Too crowded, too dangerous, so they must have worked in shifts. Some crews in the morning, others in the afternoon, night shifts maybe. Organising shifts requires careful scheduling, someone tracking who works when, making sure crews don't overlap. This creates paperwork, shift rosters, attendance records, something. Where are they? The lighting is another practical problem. You can't chip stone in darkness. You need to see what you're doing. They must have used lamps, oil lamps probably, thousands of them burning constantly for years. That requires massive amounts of oil, someone producing it, someone transporting it, someone distributing it to workers. Oil production and distribution would appear in economic records, supply chains, trade documents. Nothing mentions unusual oil consumption in Longyou County. The ventilation must have been terrible. Burning lamps consume oxygen. Thousands of workers breathing. Stone dust in the air. Without good ventilation, people would pass out or die from bad air, so they must have created air shafts, ways to bring fresh air down, ways to let bad air escape. But the caves don't show evidence of ancient ventilation systems. No shafts leading to the surface. No air channels carved into the rock. Maybe they worked near the entrance, stayed close to fresh air, but that doesn't work for the deeper sections. Some caves extend far underground, too far from the entrance for natural air circulation. The noise would have been unbearable. Thousands of chisels striking stone, the sound echoing off rock walls, amplifying, reverberating. You couldn't hear yourself think, couldn't communicate, couldn't give instructions. How did supervisors tell workers what to do? Hand signals, written notes, waiting for quiet moments. And what about the workers' hearing? Constant exposure to loud noise damages ears. They'd go deaf eventually. A community full of deaf former cave workers would be notable. People would remember that. Talk about it. No records mention this. The psychological toll interests me too. Working underground is hard mentally. No sunlight, no sky, just rock walls and darkness. Some people can't handle it. They panic, feel trapped, refuse to go back down. A project this size would see many workers quit, walk away, refuse to continue. How did they deal with this? Replace them? Force them back? Offer incentives? We don't know. No records discuss worker morale, or psychological problems, or retention rates. The expertise required suggests this wasn't the first project of its kind. You don't develop this level of skill on your first attempt. So where did they practice? What earlier projects taught them these techniques? There should be smaller caves somewhere, trial runs, learning projects, places where they figured out the methods before attempting something this massive. We haven't found them. The tools themselves are missing, thousands of bronze chisels, hammers, picks, wedges. Tools break, get lost, wear out. But some should remain, buried in the caves, dropped in corners, left behind when work stopped. Archaeologists have searched carefully. They found almost nothing. A few fragments, nothing substantial. It's like someone cleaned up thoroughly when they finished, collected every tool, removed every trace. Why bother? Tools are valuable, but not that valuable. Why spend time collecting them all, unless you wanted to hide what happened here? The end of the project is as mysterious as the beginning. How did they know when to stop? Who decided the caves were finished? And what happened to the workers afterward? Did they disperse, move to other projects, return to farming? A workforce this large doesn't just disappear. They go somewhere, do something, leave traces. But we can't find them, can't track them, can't identify what happened after the last chisel struck stone and the work finally stopped. The silence about the labour isn't just missing information. It's absence so complete it feels deliberate. Like someone wanted to make sure nobody would ever know who built these caves, or when, or why. Let's try the main theory people always bring up first. Maybe these caves were ancient quarries. On paper, it makes sense. You dig out a mountain, take all the stone, and use it somewhere else. The shape of the caves could fit. The pillars and chambers could be what's left after removing the useful rock. Lots of ancient quarries look a little like this. Rough, empty spaces with uneven walls, sometimes even pillars, because you don't want the ceiling to fall in while you work. So, are the Longyou caves just massive old quarries? It'd be a neat answer. But when you dig a little deeper, things stop adding up. Let's start with the shape and design. If you look at real ancient quarries, like the giant ones in Egypt, Greece, or even later ones in China, they're practical. Workers took the easiest path. They cut straight into the rock, making broad, open areas and leaving behind rough, irregular walls. They didn't care about how it looked. They just wanted the stone out as fast as possible. At Longyou it's different. The caves are carefully planned. The pillars are evenly spaced. The angles are precise. The walls are smooth, covered in those neat chisel marks. No random hacking, no rough corners. Everything feels intentional. Most quarries don't hide their purpose. You can usually see where the stone blocks were cut out. There are tooth marks left behind, rectangular holes where blocks once sat. At Longyou you don't see these. There aren't any square cutouts or leftover marks from removing big blocks. The stone seems to have been chipped out in small pieces, layer by layer, instead of being cut and hauled away in chunks. That's a huge difference. Now let's talk about the stone itself. If this was a quarry, the rock taken out should appear somewhere else, used in buildings, bridges, city walls or statues. Archaeologists have checked. There are no giant ancient structures nearby built with this kind of stone. Nothing in the surrounding villages, temples or city ruins matches the exact sandstone from Longyou. You'd expect to find signs of a stone boom in the local building history, but the record is silent. No sudden burst of construction using the missing material. No signs that all this rock was in high demand. Plus, think about the logistics. Moving that much stone takes more than just labour. You need roads for carts, rivers for barges, or at least some way to carry all that weight out of a rural valley. But there's no evidence of ancient roads or river docks built for heavy transport in the area. Nothing to suggest a huge operation moving millions of tons of stone away. The landscape around the caves is quiet. It doesn't match what you'd expect if there had been a busy quarry operation. And then there's the time problem. Most quarries show changes over time. As you dig deeper, you see different layers, old tool marks, paths worn by feet and carts. You might find places where workers stopped, changed direction, or left unfinished sections. At Longyou, every chamber looks finished. Every wall is smooth. There's no sign of abandoned work or changes in plan. Whoever dug these caves, they finished what they started. That's rare for a quarry. Let's think about the tools. Quarries leave behind tool fragments, broken chisels, hammers, wedges, or bits of rope and baskets. These things get lost or left behind. In Longyou, almost nothing was found. A few bits of metal and some stone chips, but nothing that matches the scale of the work. It's as if the workers cleaned up every last trace when they left. That's odd behaviour for a quarry, where time is money and nobody cares about tidying up. Now look at the decorations. In most quarries you don't get art or carvings. There's no point. Nobody's going to see the inside once the stone is gone. But in Longyou, some walls have fish, birds and horse shapes carved into the stone. They're not fancy, but they're deliberate. Someone spent extra time to add them. Why decorate a quarry? It makes no sense for a purely functional space. And here's another thing. Most ancient quarries are open to the air. They start as pits or cuttings on the side of a hill. You dig down or sideways, but you always need fresh air and sunlight. The Longyou caves are buried deep underground. The entrances are narrow. The chambers are dark. This is not the easiest way to quarry stone. Why go to all that trouble when you could just dig into a nearby hillside and cut stone in the daylight? Plus the caves are clustered together. 36 of them, all packed into a small area, some even overlapping underneath. If you're just after stone, you spread out. You don't risk one chamber collapsing into another. You take the easiest, safest rock first. At Longyou, the pattern feels planned, almost like a complex system instead of random digging. Some people argue the caves are just a weird type of quarry, built for a special project somewhere else. But nobody can point to that project. There's no forgotten city, no lost palace, no vanished wall that matches the missing stone. The timeline doesn't line up with any major construction boom in Chinese history. The stone just disappears. Then there's the problem of the cave finish. In most quarries, you leave as soon as you have what you need. You don't polish the walls or make everything look nice. You don't bother with regular patterns or smooth ceilings. At Longyou, someone went to the trouble of making the caves look good, even though, if this was a quarry, nobody was going to visit them again. Let's not forget about water. The caves were filled with water for centuries before the farmer drained them. If they were meant as quarries, why leave them to flood? Most ancient quarries have drains or channels to keep water out. You want to protect your investment, keep the stone dry and usable. In Longyou, it seems like nobody cared if the caves filled up. That doesn't fit the usual pattern. Okay, let's try another angle. Maybe the caves were a quarry for a lost or secret project. Something built and then destroyed or hidden underground. But that theory doesn't match what we know about ancient China. Even lost cities leave traces. Foundations, broken pottery, tools, coins. You can dig up the barest ruins and still find out what was there. Around Longyou, the ground is empty. No ruins, no old roadbeds, no tools scattered in the fields, just the caves themselves. Some have suggested the caves were quarries for precious minerals, not just stone. Maybe jade or a special kind of sand. But the rock at Longyou is plain sandstone. It isn't valuable. It's not the kind of material people fight wars over or haul away at great cost. There's nothing rare or special in the geology. If you wanted valuable minerals, you'd dig somewhere else. Let's talk about the organisation. Ancient quarrying involved large crews, but also simple methods. You cut the stone, load it up, and move it out. The design of Longyou is too careful, too exact. The layout inside each cave matches the others, down to the angle of the walls and the size of the pillars. That's not how regular quarries work. Usually each team does their own thing, based on the rock and the needs of the day. Here, it's like everyone followed a master plan. And there's one more thing. In normal quarries, you see signs of mistakes. Slipped tools, broken blocks, areas where the rock split the wrong way. Longyou doesn't show that. The walls are even. The ceilings are flat. The pillars are straight. It's almost too perfect. Either the workers were incredibly skilled, or they were following instructions with no room for error. Now, if you ask local people, they have no stories about quarrying. No legends about giant stones being taken away. No tales of great builders or lost cities. You'd expect at least a rumour passed down through the generations. But the oral history is blank. Let's look outside China for a second. In other countries, when people built massive quarries or underground spaces, they left marks on the land. The Romans dug out huge tunnels for stone, and you can still see the scars today. In Turkey, the underground cities have rooms, tunnels, wells, and clear signs of daily life. At Longyou, you don't see any of that. No markings that say, this was a quarry. No storage spaces, no tool rooms, no living quarters. And here's something strange. Most quarries eventually get reused. People turn them into cellars, storage spaces, even homes. If the Longyou caves were abandoned after quarrying, you'd expect later people to use them. Shelter from storms, storage for grain, places to hide valuables. But there's no sign of secondary use. The caves stayed hidden and unused, filling with water and mud until that farmer pumped his pond dry. So, if these aren't quarries, what are they? Why so careful? Why so deliberate? Why make dozens of identical chambers instead of one giant hole? Why leave everything so neat? Then walk away and let the caves disappear. And why did nobody in all the centuries since stumble on these huge empty spaces and ask, what happened here? The silence is strange. The lack of clues is strange. The caves themselves are strange. Here's what fascinates me about this. The usual explanation, quarry, fits on paper but not in practice. The details are wrong, the style is wrong, the missing stone is wrong, the lack of mistakes is wrong. It's like trying to put a puzzle together when half the pieces belong to a different picture. A real quarry leaves behind a mess, stone chips, broken tools, old paths and scars on the landscape. Longyou feels more like a finished space than a work site. It's too clean, too ordered, too hidden. Some people say we're missing something. Maybe this was a quarry for a project nobody has found. Maybe the records were destroyed in a fire or lost to time. But if that's true, it's the only case in all of China's long history where such a massive project left no trace at all. Others think we're looking at this the wrong way. Maybe our idea of what a quarry should look like doesn't fit what really happened here. Maybe the builders had a reason nobody today understands. Maybe they were following rules or beliefs that made sense in their own time, but not to us. Or maybe it wasn't about stone at all, and that's where the real mystery begins. If these caves weren't dug for stone, then what were they for? If not a quarry, maybe a tomb. So if the Longyou caves weren't just a place to get stone, what else could they be? The next big theory is that they were tombs, ancient burial places. This isn't a wild guess. All over the world, people have carved huge underground spaces to bury their dead. The Egyptians did it, the Persians did it, the Chinese did it too. Some of the most famous tombs in China are cut into mountains or dug deep underground. So maybe the caves were built to honour someone important. Maybe a king, a noble family, or a whole royal court. Let's start with what a tomb usually looks like in ancient China. If you visit a royal tomb, you'll find certain things. First, there's almost always a passageway leading in. Sometimes a long ramp or a tunnel, sometimes a hidden entrance. Inside, you'll find chambers, often lined up in a straight line or in a cross shape. The tombs are usually decorated, walls painted with pictures of the person's life, scenes of hunting, feasting, or battles. There might be statues or carvings of animals, guards, or servants. In the centre, you usually find a main burial chamber. This is where the body would rest, often in a fancy coffin or a stone box. Around the coffin, there might be treasures, gold, jade, weapons, pottery, things the person would need in the afterlife. Now, let's look at the Longyou caves again. There are some things that fit the tomb theory. The caves are huge. They're hidden underground. Some have carvings, fish, birds, horses, maybe those. Animals had special meaning. Maybe they were meant to guard the dead or guide them into the afterlife. The layout is strange too. 36 separate chambers. Some are connected, some overlap. It almost feels like a planned space, not just random digging. But here's where it gets complicated. Most tombs have a clear focal point, the burial itself. A sarcophagus, a coffin, a pit for the body. In Longyou there's nothing like that. No skeletons, no coffins, no urns, not even broken pottery or bits of cloth. Archaeologists have looked carefully. They've scanned the floors and walls, dug into the dirt, used ground-penetrating radar. Nothing. The caves are empty. If these were tombs, where are the people? Let's talk about grave goods. Chinese tombs, especially big ones, are full of stuff. Even poor people got buried with simple things. Bowls, beads, a favourite tool. Rich people went all out. Jewellery, weapons, food, little statues of servants. If the Longyou caves were tombs, they should be packed with things like this. But there's nothing. Not a single jade ornament, not a single bronze mirror, not even a clay pot. The caves are bare stone from end to end. Maybe the tombs were robbed? That's a good guess. Tomb robbing has happened for thousands of years. In China, there are stories of grave robbers as far back as the Han Dynasty. Some tombs were looted the day after they were sealed. Others lasted for centuries before someone broke in. But here's the problem. When tombs get robbed, they're usually a mess. Thieves dig tunnels, they break through walls, they smash coffins and toss things aside looking for treasure. Even if they take everything valuable, they leave a trail. Broken bits of pottery, scraps of wood or bone, sometimes even the tools they used to dig. In Longyou you don't see that. The walls are perfect, the floors are smooth, no broken stones, no piles of dirt, no secret tunnels. It doesn't look like anyone ever broke in. Let's think about the rituals. Ancient Chinese burials followed strict rules. Even regular people had certain traditions. The body would be washed, dressed, and placed facing a certain direction. Offerings would be set out. Food for the journey, money, sometimes even live animals. Priests or family members would perform ceremonies to honour the dead. These rituals often leave traces, burn marks from incense, stains from offerings, even footprints pressed into the dirt. At Longyou, there's none of that. The caves are spotless. It's like nobody ever used them. Now, about the size. Most tombs are built for one person or a family. Even the biggest ones, like the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, are centered around a single burial. The Longyou caves are different. There are 36 of them. Some are huge, big enough to fit a small house inside. Some overlap or run side by side. If these are tombs, are they for a whole city of dead? A lost dynasty? If so, where are the names? Where are the records? Ancient Chinese tombs almost always have some writing, a stone tablet, a carved name, something to say who lies inside. At Longyou there's nothing, not a single symbol or letter. Let's compare this to other underground tombs in China. For example, the tombs near Xi'an. These are carefully mapped. Each one has a clear entrance, a main chamber, side rooms for treasures, and a burial spot. The walls are painted. The floors sometimes have tiles. In some, you find murals, pictures of daily life, battles, or heaven. You also find traps, hidden pits or false doors to confuse robbers. In Longyou you don't see these features. No hidden doors, no painted murals, no tiles, just bare rock, chisel marks, and a few simple animal carvings. Some people have pointed out the chisel marks themselves. Maybe they're not just tool marks. Maybe they're a type of decoration. In ancient times, patterns on walls could mean something. In Egyptian tombs, for example, the walls are covered with symbols and stories. Maybe the 60-degree angle lines in Longyou are a kind of code, but if that's true, nobody's cracked it yet. The lines don't form pictures or text, they just cover every surface all the same way. Now let's talk about the feeling of the place. Tombs are usually built to be visited, at least for a short time. Family members might come to leave offerings or pray. Priests might come to make sacrifices. Tombs often have steps or ramps leading in. Sometimes there's a courtyard or a room for ceremonies. The Longyou caves have narrow entrances, sometimes just big enough for one person at a time. The chambers are deep underground. There's no sign of altars, steps, or places for visitors to gather. It's like the caves were never meant to be entered again once finished. Here's another thing. If you look at other ancient tombs, you find signs of water control. Builders knew that flooding could ruin a tomb. They built drains or sealed doors to keep water out. The Longyou caves filled with water for centuries. If they were tombs, the builders did nothing to stop this. That's hard to explain. Why go to all the trouble of carving these enormous spaces only to let them flood and disappear? It doesn't fit the pattern. Let's consider the timing. Scholars have tried to date the caves by looking at the tool marks, the type of rock, and the style of the animal carvings. The results are all over the place. Some think the caves are 2,000 years old. Others say they could be older. But no ancient Chinese tomb from any known era matches the look or size of Longyou. The closest things are the tombs from the Han and Tang dynasties, but those have very different layouts. None have so many separate chambers, all the same size and shape. Some people suggest a lost dynasty or a forgotten culture built the caves as a megatomb. Maybe these people had their own burial style, one that left no trace except the stone itself. But that's a big leap. China's history is detailed. Even in chaotic times, people wrote things down. If a whole new culture built 36 giant tombs, you'd expect to find some sign of them somewhere else. A ruined village, a broken pot, a rusty sword. But nothing turns up. Maybe the caves were meant as empty tombs, a kind of spiritual resting place, not meant to hold real bodies. In some cultures, people built tombs for their ancestors' spirits, not for physical remains. Or they built cenotaphs, monuments honouring the dead but left empty inside. Maybe Longyou is something like that. But again, there's no record, no legends, no stories handed down. Let's get creative for a second. Maybe the caves were built as decoy tombs, fake burial chambers to distract robbers from the real tomb somewhere else. The idea isn't crazy. Some pharaohs in Egypt did it. They built false tombs to protect the real one. But in those cases, the real tomb is always nearby, and the fake ones usually have clues or traps. At Longyou, you don't see any of that. Just empty, finished chambers. Or maybe the caves were meant for mass burials during a plague or a war. In times of disaster, people have dug mass graves. But these are usually rough pits, not carefully built spaces, and even if the bodies were removed later, you'd expect to find traces, bones, teeth, jewellery, hair. Nothing like that has ever been found in Longyou. Some people think the caves were never finished. Maybe the builders started with the idea of making tombs but quit before they buried anyone. Maybe something stopped them. War, famine, disease. But this theory doesn't fit with how polished the caves are. Every chamber looks finished. The walls are smooth. The pillars are perfect. It doesn't look like a rushed or abandoned job. So, what's left? If these were tombs, they don't match any other tombs we know. No bodies, no treasures, no writing, no signs of ritual, no signs of grave robbers. The animal carvings are mysterious, but not enough on their own. The tool marks could be decoration, or just the way the builders worked. The layout is unique. The silence in the records is total. Here's what fascinates me about this. The tomb theory feels close, but not quite right. It explains the size, the secrecy, maybe even the planning. But it trips over the facts. No bodies, no offerings, no broken pottery, no written names. The caves are too empty, too clean, too blank. It's like someone built the world's biggest tomb, then decided not to use it. Or maybe they did use it, but in a way we can't see anymore. Maybe the real purpose was spiritual, not physical. Maybe the tomb was for a god, or an idea, or a secret nobody wrote down. Or maybe the caves are telling us something we don't understand yet. Maybe the builders had a reason for making these spaces that's lost to us now. A belief, a fear, or a hope that never made it into the history books. Maybe it's not about bodies or treasure at all. And here's where the mystery deepens. If the caves weren't tombs, then what were they hiding from? Why go underground? Why carve out so many huge empty spaces and then leave them behind? What was happening above ground that made people do something so strange, so permanent, and then vanish without a word? Maybe there was something they feared. Maybe they were hiding from something. Or maybe the caves were a shield, a place of safety, or even a message for the future. Whatever the answer, it hasn't turned up yet. The silence holds. The puzzle remains. And the Longyou caves keep their secrets, waiting for someone to ask the right question. Let's take the next big step in these theories. If the caves weren't tombs, and they weren't just for digging out stone, could they have been something else entirely? A bunker, maybe? A shelter? A place to hide from disaster or attack? This idea pops up a lot in discussions about mysterious underground spaces. It makes sense on the surface. Why else carve out such a huge hidden place and then leave no sign of who used it? Think about what a bunker is for. Safety, security. Somewhere you go when things above ground get too dangerous. War, natural disaster, invasion, even a sudden attack from bandits or wild animals. The idea is simple. Get underground, stay alive, wait it out, then go back up when things are safe. It's not just a modern idea. People have built shelters for thousands of years. So could these huge, silent chambers be ancient bunkers? Let's break it down. First, the size. 36 chambers, some big enough to fit dozens or even hundreds of people. That's a lot of space. If you needed to protect a whole village from danger, you'd need something big. The layout could work too. Many of the rooms are close together, some connect, others don't. It almost looks like a network. Places where people could gather, rest, and stay hidden. The narrow entrances might have been easy to guard or block off. If you wanted to keep enemies out, a single person could defend one of those doorways. But here's the thing. Real bunkers, even ancient ones, leave certain clues. They have signs of people living there, at least for a while. Fire pits, soot on the ceilings, ash in the corners, places to store food or water. Sometimes you find simple furniture, benches cut from the rock, shelves or niches for lamps. There might be trash or broken tools left behind. In these caves you don't see that. No ash, no blackened ceilings, no piles of burned bone or food scraps. Let's talk about water. If you're hiding underground for days or weeks, you need water. Ancient shelters often have wells, channels, or cisterns. Some even tapped into underground streams. In this case, the caves filled with water over the centuries, but there's no sign they were designed to catch or store it. No drains, no wells, no clay, pipes or channels carved into the floor. Just bare stone. What about air? Deep underground, fresh air is a problem. People need to breathe. The bigger the group, the more important it is to get good airflow. Ancient builders knew this. They carved vents or shafts, sometimes hidden, to bring in fresh air and let out smoke. In these caves you don't see proper ventilation shafts. There are no holes leading up to the surface, no chimneys, no clever ways to move air around. If a large group tried to hide here for long, it would get stuffy fast, maybe even dangerous. Let's think about food and supplies. If this was a place to shelter during trouble, people would bring what they needed. You'd expect to find storage pits, shelves, or at least some leftover containers. In many ancient shelters, archaeologists find pottery, storage jars, or baskets. There's nothing like that here, not even broken pieces. Now to the entrances. In a true emergency shelter, you want a way in and a way out. Maybe even several exits, in case you need to escape quickly. Most of these caves have just one small entrance. Some are hidden underwater, others are hard to reach. This makes sense for defense, but it's risky if you're trapped inside. If the entrance collapsed or got blocked, there's no other way out. Let's go bigger. Could these have been built for a massive disaster? Something that threatened everyone above ground? People sometimes talk about apocalypse bunkers, places to survive a flood, a fire, a war, or even a cosmic event. Think of the stories about Noah's Ark or the underground cities in Turkey, built to hide from invaders. But when you look at those real examples, there's always evidence of long-term use. Cooking fires, trash pits, bones from meals, stone doors that roll into place to seal off the entrance. In those Turkish cities, you find kitchens, stables, wells, even wine presses. Life underground, not just empty rooms. In these caves, there's none of that. No sign anyone cooked a meal, no kitchen space, no animal pens, no storage rooms for grain or supplies. It feels less like a home and more like an empty shell. Some people wonder if the caves were used only once, for a single big emergency, then abandoned. That could explain the lack of daily trash. But even in a one-time crisis, people leave things behind. Tools, clothing, maybe a forgotten bowl or a broken sandal. Here, the stone is clean, untouched. Let's talk about secrecy. If you build a bunker, you want it hidden. These chambers were covered by ponds for centuries. That could be nature, or it could be by design. Maybe the builders meant for the water to hide the entrances. That would make the caves hard to find, even if you were looking for them. But if secrecy was the goal, why make the rooms so big and so many? Why not hide a few small shelters instead of 36 huge ones? What about defense? If you expect trouble, you fortify your hideout. Open spaces, silent and still. Now to the open spaces, silent and still. Now to the question of war. Could these be a military base? A place where soldiers hid, or where weapons were stored? It's possible. Armies need barracks, armories, storage for food and gear. But once again, there's nothing left to suggest military use. No arrowheads, no spear tips, no armour or shields, no written orders or banners. Even in places that have been looted, archaeologists usually find some trace of weapons or equipment. Here, there's none. Let's step back and look at the big picture. In other parts of the world, underground shelters were built for different reasons. In Malta, there are huge underground temples and safe rooms carved into rock. In Cappadocia, entire cities went underground to hide from raiders. In England, people dug tunnels to escape invaders in medieval times. All these places tell a story. You can see how they were used. You find the marks of daily life, fires, food, tools, even toys. The caves in Longyou don't tell that story. They don't have those marks. Some have suggested disease. Maybe people dug these out to escape a plague. Stay underground, away from sickness. But hiding from disease works only if you can seal the entrance and survive for a while inside. That means food, water, air, and it means you leave something behind. Empty jars, animal bones, scraps of cloth. Here, there's nothing. Let's think about natural disasters. Earthquakes, floods, fires. Underground spaces can protect against all of these, at least for a short time. But if you're sheltering from a flood, you don't dig below the water table. If you're hiding from fire, you want an exit route. If you're worried about earthquakes, you don't carve such big open halls with thin roofs. The design doesn't fit the threat. What if these built huge projects to prove they're built, huge projects to prove their might? Walls, towers, canals, pyramids. Sometimes those projects didn't have a real use beyond impressing people. But even then, there was usually a record. Carvings, inscriptions, a story passed down. Here we don't have that, just the stone. Maybe these chambers were a kind of psychological shelter, not a physical one, a place to show control over nature. We can go underground, we can shape the earth. Maybe it was about conquering fear, not hiding from a real threat. Let's look at another idea. Could these have been used for storing something? Not people, but grain, water, or valuables. Ancient societies built huge underground granaries to protect food from heat, thieves, and pests. But in those places you find traces, bits of grain, storage bins, ventilation for, keeping things dry. There's none of that here. Some have even wondered about more unusual uses. Maybe the caves were meant for ceremonies but not religious ones, secret meetings, planning sessions, a place where leaders gathered out of sight. But if that's true, why make so many? Why go so deep? Why leave no trace of chairs, lamps, or decorations? Let's step into the world of legend for a moment. Some people love the idea of lost technology. Maybe these spaces were created for a purpose we can't even guess. A machine, a ritual, or a science that vanished from memory. Maybe the builders had reasons that made sense only to them. But then we run into the same problem. No debris, no pieces of that technology, no hint of what was once there, just emptiness. It's possible the caves were never meant for human use at all. Maybe they were built for animals, stables for prized horses or cattle. But there's no sign of animals living here. No bones, no dung, no feeding, no troughs, no niches for hay or water. Could they be mines for a lost resource? Something more valuable than stone? Maybe the rock itself was special, but geologists haven't found anything rare here. The stone is ordinary sandstone. No trace of gold, silver, or precious minerals. Just regular rock carved away by hand. Let's talk about the effort. Whoever built these had skill, patience, and a plan. This wasn't a quick job. It took generations, probably. Maybe it was a tradition, passed down from parents to children. We dig, we shape, we move stone. But why? To what end? The goal is missing. Here's what gets me about the bunker theory. It explains some things. The secrecy, the underground setting, the careful construction. But it doesn't fit the details. Real shelters have marks of life. Fires, food, trash. These chambers don't. There's no sign of panic, no sign of hurry. The work is too careful, too exact. If you're digging for survival, you don't worry about making perfect chisel marks at 60 degrees. You don't polish the pillars. You dig fast. You make do. So maybe the answer is simpler or stranger. Maybe the builders weren't hiding from something. Maybe they were creating something. A space to shape their own world. A place apart from daily life. Not for hiding, but for making a mark. Or maybe the caves were meant to be filled, not emptied. Maybe something was stored here and removed long ago. Something that left no trace. Or perhaps these spaces are a blank canvas, waiting for us to project our own fears, hopes, and dreams onto them. The silence makes us wonder. The emptiness lets us imagine. What fascinates me about this is how much the caves resist our labels. Bunker, tomb, quarry, storage, all are close, but none fit right. It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. The facts keep slipping away. So, if not a tomb and not a bunker, What about something spiritual? A place for worship, a temple? That's the next idea people explore, and it opens a whole new set of mysteries. Let's go deeper. If this place wasn't for storage, hiding, or the dead, then maybe it was for something more mysterious. Ritual, belief, or power. When people first see the size and shape of these spaces, their minds go straight to temples, places for worship, grand halls carved for gods, spirits, or ancestors. The idea isn't wild. All over the world, people have built strange, massive spaces for a higher purpose. Cathedrals, pyramids, sacred caves, each one meant to bring people together for something bigger than daily life. So let's put ourselves in that mindset for a bit. Imagine it's thousands of years ago. No big cities, no highways, just small villages and farmland. You're part of a group that wants to make a mark, not just on the land, but in the minds of those who come after. You want to build something that feels special, not just useful, but powerful. You don't have steel, you have machines, but you have time, patience, and a vision. It makes sense, right? People love to build big things for their beliefs. Look at Stonehenge. Look at the Great Pyramids. Even the painted caves in France and Spain. Those were about more than shelter. They were about stories, spirits, and the unknown. Maybe the builders here wanted to do the same, to connect with something above or below. Let's look at what you'd expect from a temple. Usually these places are decorated. Even if it's just simple marks or patterns, there's often something to show the space is special. At Longyou, you see those neat chisel marks everywhere. And in some spots, you get shapes, fish, birds, horses. Maybe those are symbols. Maybe they meant something to the people who made them. Maybe not. Next, think about layout. Temples often have a plan. They're not just random rooms. There's an entrance, a path, a main hall. Sometimes smaller rooms off to the side. The shape is meant to guide you, to create a feeling of awe or focus. Here you get 36 separate spaces. Some connect, others are isolated. This isn't like a single church or shrine. It's more like a cluster, a network. Why so many? Why this pattern? Here's where the questions build up. If you want people to gather, you make space for them. These chambers are big enough for crowds, but there's no sign anyone ever stood in them in large numbers. The floors are clean, no benches, no platforms, no fire pits or lamps. Nothing that says people met here. Let's talk about sound. Temples play with sound. Echoes can make voices boom or songs ring out. Underground spaces are perfect for this. The walls bounce sound back and forth. Maybe a chant here would sound huge. Maybe footsteps would echo like thunder. But if this was the goal, you'd expect more decoration, or at least some sign of music or words. You don't see that. What about light? Many temples use light in clever ways. Sunbeams, through cracks, torches on the walls. In these caves, light is a problem. The only light comes from the entrance unless you bring fire, but there's no sign of smoke or soot. No blackening on the ceiling, no lamp holders. If people spent time here, they did it in darkness, or they had some way to see without leaving a trace. That's odd. Let's pause and compare. In ancient China, temples left clues. Shrines had altars, carvings of gods, spirits, or sacred animals, sometimes statues or incense burners. Even in simple wooden temples, you find holes in the floor where posts once stood, or bits of coloured paint. None of that is here, not even a niche for an offering. But what if this place was meant for a different kind of ritual? Maybe something secret or private. Maybe only a few people were allowed inside. That could explain the lack of benches or altars. Maybe the act of carving the space was the ritual. Maybe the process mattered more than the finished room. That's a theory some people like. The idea is that the work itself was a spiritual act. Each chisel mark, a prayer or a promise. The marks on the wall could be reminders of that effort. Every worker left a piece of themselves in the stone. Let's think about how long it would take. If it took decades to carve out these spaces, then maybe generations of people work side by side. Parents teaching children, skills passed down, the community bound together by a long project. In that sense, the caves could be more than a place. They could be a story told in stone. That's a powerful idea. It's not just China. All over the world, people have built things like this. The Hypogeum in Malta, the underground temples in India. Each one started with a group and a dream. Each one shows marks of culture, symbols, statues, or paint. But even the simplest sacred caves have something to set them apart. A focus point, an altar, some sign of ritual use. Here it's blank, not a scratch that looks like writing. Not a symbol saying this is for the gods. Not even a single broken incense burner, or a piece of pottery you could call an offering. Let's dig into the animal carvings. Fish, birds, horses. They're simple. No fancy detail, just outlines. Maybe these were totems, animals with special meaning. Maybe they were clan symbols or signs of luck. In Chinese culture, fish often mean wealth or plenty. Birds can mean freedom, horses, power or travel. But there's no pattern, no clear story. The images are scattered. They don't line up to form a scene. They don't seem to point to a single belief or legend. What about the chisel marks? Some people see them as decoration. Maybe the pattern was meant to be seen by torchlight, making the walls shimmer. Maybe the lines carried meaning, a kind of code, but nobody has cracked it. The marks are everywhere, but there's no obvious message. Let's step back again. If this was a sacred place, you'd expect people to protect it, to pass down its story. Even if the temple fell out of use, legends usually survive. People remember the old holy places, even if only as tales. Here, there's nothing. Not a single story in the village. Not a myth about a god, a hero, or a curse. That's rare. Even lost temples leave behind whispers. Could it be that this place was sacred in a way we don't understand? Maybe it didn't fit the pattern of other temples. Maybe belief was private. Maybe the meaning was only for those who built it. Some cultures keep secrets. Some rituals are for the few, not the many. Maybe the caves were meant to hide knowledge, not share it. There's another theory. Maybe the caves weren't for traditional worship, but for transformation. A place to go into darkness, to come out changed. In some cultures, people go underground for vision quests or to face a fear. The silence and dark can do strange things to your mind. Maybe these spaces were for that, a kind of test or a rite of passage. But again, we hit the same wall, no proof, no bones from sacrifices, no rings of stones for fire, no carvings of faces or gods, just empty rooms, lined with those perfect angled marks. Some people look at the scale and see ambition. Maybe this was a show of power. Look what we can do, even underground. In the ancient world, rulers often built huge temples to show their strength. Maybe a local leader wanted to impress neighbours, to create a meeting place for the powerful. But then, why hide it? If you want to show off, you put your temple on a hill, not under a pond. Let's talk about the physical effort. Digging out millions of cubic feet of stone by hand isn't just hard. It's a test of will. Maybe the builders meant to prove something to themselves, or to the world. We can shape the earth. Maybe the process was more important than the result. That happens sometimes. In Japan, monks rake sand gardens over and over, not for the finished pattern, but for the act itself. Maybe this was the same, but with stone. It's possible these spaces were never finished. Maybe the original plan was even bigger. Maybe the builders stopped before adding decoration, altars, or statues. Something happened. A war. a famine, a flood. The project ended. The meaning was lost with the last worker, but if so, you'd expect to see unfinished work, tools left behind, half-carved walls, but everything here looks complete. The marks are too neat. The chambers are shaped with care. Another idea. Maybe these spaces were meant for gatherings but not for worship. Maybe they were for councils or storytelling, a place to escape the sun, to meet in secret. In ancient societies, important talk sometimes happened underground, but most meeting halls leave signs, places to sit, to stand, to light a fire for warmth or cooking. Here there's nothing. What about teaching? Maybe this was a school, a place to learn or study. If so, you'd expect to find symbols, writing or art on the walls, maybe diagrams. But these walls are blank, except for the patterns and the odd animal shape. Let's not forget the water. For centuries the entrances were hidden below ponds. Was that on purpose? Maybe the water was part of the ritual. Maybe the journey to the space mattered. First through water, then stone, then darkness. Water is sacred in many cultures, a symbol of life or of crossing between worlds. Maybe the builders wanted to create that feeling, but if so, you'd expect more signs of ritual, offerings thrown into the water, carved stones on the pond's edge. None of that is here. What about astronomy? Some temples line up with the sun, the moon, or the stars. Maybe these chambers point to something in the sky. People have checked. The entrances don't match up with the sunrise or sunset. There's no obvious pattern to the layout. It doesn't fit known constellations. If there's a secret code, nobody's found it yet. There's a theory that the caves were made to store knowledge, not objects, but ideas. Maybe the patterns are a language, a map, a calendar. But if so, it's a lost language. No other site in China has the same marks, no key to unlock the meaning. Some people say the emptiness is the point. Maybe these spaces were meant to be blank, a place for the mind to wander, a canvas for dreams, not stories. Stand in one of these rooms and you feel it, the weight of silence, the pull of the unknown. It's possible the builders wanted to erase themselves, to leave only the work, not the story. Some cultures believe that true art is anonymous. The maker doesn't matter, only the creation. Maybe the story was never meant to be told. What fascinates me about this mystery is how it pulls you in. The more you look, the less you know. Every theory fits for a second, then slips away. The facts say temple, but the details say something else. It's like a puzzle with half the pieces missing. And here's the thing. Maybe we're asking the wrong questions. Maybe the people who built this didn't think about temples or tombs or storage. Maybe they just wanted to make something lasting, something that would survive after memory faded. A mark in the world, waiting for someone, anyone, to find it and wonder. Or maybe the real meaning is gone forever, lost when the last storyteller died, when the last child stopped asking why did they dig here. That's the real silence. Not just the silence of empty rooms, but the silence of lost words. So, was it a temple? Maybe in some way. Maybe not in any way we'd recognize. Every theory tries to tie it down to give it a label, but every answer falls short. Next, let's look at what happens when every theory fails. That's when the stranger details start to stand out. The little things that don't fit any pattern, and the questions that keep you up at night. So, let's get into what really makes the Longyou Caves so bizarre. Not just the big stuff, the size, the missing records, the strange silence. It's the details. The little things you notice when you start looking closely. The odd facts that just don't fit. These are the things that keep researchers awake at night. And honestly, they're the things that make this mystery feel so stubborn. It's like the caves are challenging us. Figure me out, I dare you. Let's start with the entrances. If you walk around the area today, most of the cave openings are hidden or sunken. Some used to be under ponds, others are tucked into hillsides. But none of them are grand or showy. You'd expect a project this massive to have a main doorway, a gate, some kind of marker, maybe steps leading down, maybe a carved sign above the entrance. Instead, the entrances are small, sometimes just wide enough for a person to slip through. Nothing about them says, "Look here." They're almost trying to hide. And then there's the placement. The caves don't line up in a neat row. They aren't set in a grid or a circle. They're scattered, some right next to each other, some a bit farther away. No obvious pattern. If you look from above, it doesn't form a picture or a symbol. Some chambers connect, others don't. It's like someone dug out these huge spaces and just stopped wherever they liked. Or maybe they followed something underground, veins in the rock, old cracks, or even water flows. But if that's true, there's no sign they were chasing the best stone, like in a quarry. The stone itself isn't special. It's regular sandstone, not precious. Nothing rare or valuable about it. Let's talk about the inside. Once you step into one of these chambers, the first thing you notice is the temperature. It's cool, even on a hot day. Underground spaces keep a steady climate. That would have been useful for storage, sure, but we already know it wasn't just about keeping things cold. What's weirder is the air. The caves don't have big vents, but somehow they don't fill up with stale air. You'd expect a problem with ventilation in closed underground rooms. But people can walk inside today without trouble. No sign of smoke stains, no soot from fires, but also no sign that people suffocated. Did the builders know some trick to keep the air moving? Were there hidden shafts now blocked by time, or did they just get lucky with the rock layers? Nobody's found any hidden tunnels leading up, and it's not like there's a chimney in each chamber. Now let's look at the floors. They're smooth, almost polished. Not rough like you'd expect from chipping away at stone for years. No piles of debris in the corners, no scratch marks from dragging heavy things around. It's as if someone swept them clean and then left. In some places the floors dip slightly in the middle, creating a shallow basin. Sometimes, after heavy rain, water collects in these dips, but there's no sign the builders made proper drains. If you wanted to use these spaces for storage or living, you'd probably want the floor flat, or at least sloped to keep water away. These dips don't seem planned. They might be a side effect of the digging, or maybe they had a purpose we're missing. Now here's a detail that's easy to miss. In some spots the walls have faint lines, almost like guidelines. These are straight, sometimes running from floor to ceiling. They're not chisel marks. They look like someone scratched a line as a reference before carving. You see these in some ancient stonework. Builders draw lines to keep everything straight. But here, the lines don't always match the angle of the finished wall. Sometimes they start and stop at odd places. It's like the workers change plans halfway through. Or maybe these are the remains of an earlier phase, a rough draft scratched in stone. Let's talk about water again, but this time from a different angle. For centuries these caves sat filled with water, not just a little, but completely submerged. The water was clear, cold, and didn't go stagnant. Locals even fished in the ponds above, not knowing what was below. The stone walls stayed solid, with almost no leaks or collapses. That's rare. Most underground spaces fill with silt or cave in after being flooded for so long. Here, the water acted like a seal. It kept the caves hidden and preserved. But that raises another question. Did the builders know the water would fill them? Did they want that? Or did the water rise after the caves were abandoned? If the flooding was planned, maybe the water itself was part of the purpose. Maybe it was meant to hide or protect these spaces from outsiders. Here's something that doesn't fit any normal pattern. In a few chambers there are shallow steps carved into the walls. Not stairs you can climb, but more like small ledges. They run around the edge of the room, sometimes 2 or 3 steps high, like giant shelves. They're too narrow to sit on, too low to store much. They don't connect to any doorway. What were they for? Some people think they might have been for lighting. Maybe a row of lamps or candles, but there's no soot. Others think they could have been for displays, but there's nothing left on them. Or maybe they're just the remains of the digging process, left behind by accident, but they're too regular for that. Let's switch to another odd fact. In almost every chamber, there's a faint echo. Not a normal echo, but a strange one. If you talk at normal volume, your voice bounces back softly, almost like a whisper. But if you shout, the sound gets swallowed up. It doesn't ring out like in a church or a tunnel. It's a strange effect and nobody's sure why. The shape of the rooms, the angle of the walls, maybe even the texture of the chisel marks. All of these could play a part. Some sound engineers have visited to test this. Their equipment picked up odd patterns. Sound waves move differently in these spaces. It's not enough to call it magic, but it's not normal either. Maybe it was planned, maybe it's just luck. But it makes the caves feel otherworldly. Let's talk about the animal carvings again, but from a new angle. In a couple of chambers, the fish shapes are arranged in what looks like a loose circle. In others, they're scattered. The birds and horses are much rarer, just a few examples in the entire complex. What's interesting is that none of these carvings overlap with chisel marks. It's as if the animal shapes were added after the main work was done. Maybe they marked something important, a special spot, or maybe people came back later, long after the caves were finished, and added their own symbols. The styles don't match any known period. They're too simple, almost childlike. There's no sign of paint or colour, no signature, no date, just outlines like sketches in stone. Now, here's a detail you won't find in most articles. In some places, the ceiling has what look like small holes, less than an inch across. They aren't regular. Some are grouped together, some stand alone. Nobody's sure if these are natural or made by hand. They don't go deep. Maybe someone tried to drill into the rock, or maybe they're relics of old wooden pegs that have long since rotted away. In ancient construction, people sometimes used wooden beams to support roofs while carving. They'd remove the beams later, leaving holes. But here, the holes aren't arranged in a pattern that makes sense for support beams. Some are in places where you wouldn't need extra strength. Maybe they held decorations, or maybe they're just random. Let's talk about the leftover tools, or more accurately, the missing tools. For a project this size, you'd expect to find broken chisels, hammerheads, or pieces of equipment left behind. Even if the workers cleaned up, a few scraps should have survived, but no tools have ever turned up in the caves or nearby, not even fragments. No lost picks, no handles, no sharpening stones. It's like the workers cleaned up every last bit. Or maybe they took their tools with them, but why be so careful? In most ancient work sites, you always find something left behind. Here, nothing. That level of tidiness feels almost deliberate. Let's zoom out and think about the larger area. Around the caves, the soil has been studied. Archaeologists dug test pits, looking for traces of ancient camps, workshops, or settlements. They found almost nothing. No trash piles, no food scraps, no old fire pits. No sign that hundreds or thousands of people lived nearby for years. That doesn't make sense. A project this size should leave a mess, a clear footprint in the dirt. But the land around the caves is quiet. There's farmland, some modern houses, and not much else. It's like the builders finished their work and vanished, leaving no trace above ground. Let's move to another strange fact. When researchers tried to date the caves, they ran into a wall. Usually you can find bits of wood, bone, or pottery in the dirt. You use those to figure out how old something is. Here, nothing. No ancient trash, no broken pots, no lost jewellery, Not even a bit of charcoal. That makes it almost impossible to get an exact date. Some scientists try to test the chisel marks themselves, looking for bits of bronze or traces of wear. But sandstone doesn't hold those clues well. The best they could do was guess based on style, and that's shaky. Most estimates put the caves at around 2,000 years old, but that's just a hunch. Now, let's talk about the local stories, or really the lack of them. In almost every ancient site, even forgotten ones, you find legends, myths, ghost stories. This hill is haunted. That cave holds treasure. Not here. For centuries, the people living above had no idea the caves existed. No stories about gods, kings, or monsters. No rumours about lost treasure or hidden dangers. It's like the memory of the caves was erased on purpose, or maybe nobody ever knew. That's strange. Oral history is strong in rural places. Stories last for generations. But here, nothing survived. Let's go back to the construction for a moment. Carving out sandstone isn't easy, but it's doable with bronze tools. The problem is keeping those tools sharp. Sandstone wears down bronze quickly. You'd need to stop and sharpen your chisel every few hours. For 1,000,000 cubic meters of stone, you'd go through thousands of chisels. That's a lot of metal, but there's no sign of a smithy or toolmaker's shop in the area. No slag heaps from melting metal. No piles of broken tools tossed aside. It's as if every chisel was used, sharpened, and then taken away when the job was done. Or maybe the tools were made elsewhere and brought in. But then, why no record of such a big job? Now, here's where things get really weird. Some chambers have walls that almost seem to hum if you press your ear against them. It's probably just the wind moving through cracks, or maybe distant traffic. But people who visit swear it's different. A low, steady vibration, just at the edge of hearing. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just the mind playing tricks in the dark. But it adds to the feeling that these rooms are not ordinary. Let's look at another oddity. In a few places, the chisel marks are interrupted by smooth patches. No tools seem to have touched these spots. They're as smooth as glass, maybe 2 feet wide, running from floor to ceiling. No explanation. Maybe the rock was softer there. Maybe the builders planned to carve something and never did. Or maybe these were meant to be message boards, left blank for a reason, but there's no writing, no paint, nothing to suggest what these blank slates were for. Now, let's talk about the way the chambers are connected. Some have narrow doorways between them, just big enough for a person to squeeze through. Others are sealed off completely. No door, no window, just solid rock. You can see where a tunnel might have been started, then stopped. Maybe they planned to connect all the caves and change their minds. Or maybe these sealed rooms had a special purpose. But nobody's found hidden passages or secret doors, at least not yet. Here's something that's easy to overlook. In a few places the ceiling curves down low, almost touching the floor. You have to crouch to get through. Why make a space so hard to move in? If this was for gatherings, why make people duck? Some people think these spots were meant to discourage entry, maybe to keep out animals, or to make the space feel more mysterious. Or maybe it's just a side effect of carving around a weak spot in the rock. Let's switch gears for a second. In the 1990s, when the caves were drained, workers found a few odd objects in the sediment. Not ancient treasures, but modern junk. Bottles, coins, even bicycle parts. Nothing from the time of the builders. That tells us the caves were truly sealed off for centuries. Nobody wandered in and out, leaving behind their trash. Once the water came in, the caves went silent. Let's pause and think about the energy it would take to make these spaces. Not just muscle power, but motivation. Day after day, chipping stone, working in the dark, breathing dust, no sunlight, no breeze. You'd need strong reasons to keep going. Was it about pride, duty, fear? Nobody knows. But the effort is written in every surface. Here's a detail that's almost haunting. In some caves, the acoustics make it hard to tell where sound comes from. If you snap your fingers, the echo bounces in strange ways. It's disorienting. If you were hiding here, you'd have an advantage. But if you were lost, you'd feel alone, even if someone was just a few feet away. Maybe that was planned, maybe not, but it adds to the atmosphere. Let's touch on the idea of lost knowledge. In ancient China, stoneworking skills were passed down from master to apprentice. Techniques were guarded, sometimes kept secret within families. But the style in these caves doesn't match any known tradition. It's like a whole set of skills appeared, were used for this one job, then vanished. No other site in China has the same patterns, the same method. It's a one-of-a-kind mystery. Now, let's think about what comes next. At this point, every normal theory has been tried and found wanting. Storage, tomb, temple, quarry, bunker, each one fits some details, but never all. That's when you start to wonder about the things you can't see, about the ways people might try to erase a memory, or hide a story so well that even their descendants wouldn't know it existed. That's the real heart of the Longyou puzzle. It isn't just about stone and effort, it's about forgetting, about the things people choose to leave behind and the things they choose to erase. The caves sit in silence, daring us to remember something no one living has ever known. And now, let's turn to the hardest question of all. How do you make something this big, this strange, and then wipe it from memory? What does it mean to erase an entire chapter of history, on purpose or by accident? That's where our journey heads next. So, here we are, staring at the emptiness where a story should be. A place dug by human hands, but with its story cut out of the record. This is where the theories about erasure start. Not just the physical kind, moving piles of stone, hiding entrances, but the deeper kind, the erasure of memory itself. How do you hide a project this big? Or, even stranger, how do you make people forget it ever happened? Let's walk through the main theories, one by one, and see what makes sense and what just gets stranger the more you look at it. First up, the simplest idea. Maybe it wasn't. Erased on purpose. Maybe people just forgot. Over time, even the biggest things can be swallowed up by routine and weather and new generations. Kids grow up, old people die, and stories get lost. The world moves on. We're used to thinking history is a straight line, with memories handed down like a family photo album. But that's not always true. Sometimes whole chapters just get skipped. Maybe the caves were built, used for a while, and then abandoned when something better came along. Maybe people left the area, or a disaster forced them out, and the memory just faded. Sounds simple, right? But here's what doesn't fit. Even when people forget the details, traces usually hang on. Place names, odd words, folk tales, warnings. Don't go there, it's haunted. That hill used to be something. Here, it's silence. Not even a whisper that something huge lay below their feet. That's not normal forgetting. That's a blank spot. Wiped clean. Let's try another angle. Maybe the caves were part of a secret. Something people weren't supposed to talk about. Secret societies, forbidden rituals, hidden knowledge. These ideas always pop up when there's a gap in the record. In China's long history, there were times when certain practices were banned, certain books burned, certain stories erased. Maybe the builders belonged to a group that needed to hide. Maybe the caves were a private place for ceremonies, or a refuge when things got dangerous. If that's true, the silence would be a way to protect the group. Don't talk, don't write, don't leave clues. And if something happened to the group, if they were wiped out or scattered, the secret dies with them. Maybe that's what happened here. But even secret societies usually leave a mark. Symbols, hidden signs, coded language. Archaeologists love finding these. Not a single one has turned up in Longyou. The fish and bird carvings are just too simple. They don't match any known code. If this was a secret, it was the kind that left nothing for anyone to find. Now, let's think about the official side. Could the government or the ruling class have erased the caves from history on purpose? In old China, emperors had the power to change the record. They could order books destroyed, names forgotten, stories changed to fit their own version of events. Maybe the caves were connected to a failed rebellion, or a ruler who fell out of favour. Maybe the people who built them were punished, their work erased as a warning. Forget this, don't speak of it. We know this happened sometimes. Whole families or cities could be wiped from the scrolls. But here's the problem. Usually, even when something is erased, the erasure itself leaves a mark. You see gaps in the records, you find out-of-place dates, sudden changes in the story. Historians notice these blank spots and start asking questions. In Longyou, there's not even a gap. The local records just roll on from one year to the next, as if nothing happened at all. Is almost too clean. Here's a different idea. Maybe the caves were so ordinary to the people who lived with them that nobody bothered to write it down. Imagine if, for some reason, huge underground spaces were just a normal part of village life. Maybe every family used a cave like this for storage, meetings, or shelter. If something is normal, you don't think to record it. You don't write about your shoes or your front door or the way you brush your teeth. Maybe the caves were like that. But this runs into a big problem. Nowhere else in China, or the world, do we see underground spaces like these as just normal. Even in places with lots of caves, people talk about them. They show up in stories, in art, in law codes. So why would Longyou be the one place where people built giant caverns and just shrugged it off? It doesn't add up. Let's zoom out. Maybe the answer isn't about hiding the caves, but about hiding what happened in them. Sometimes places get erased because something terrible happened there. A disaster, a crime, a curse. Maybe people wanted to forget. In ancient times, places of suffering could be left alone, sealed off, and the story quietly dropped. Over time, people stopped mentioning it. Parents stopped telling their kids. The name changes. After a few generations, nobody remembers why you shouldn't go there. If something like that happened in Longyou, it would explain the silence. But again, in most cases a shadow remains, a warning, a legend, a bad feeling people can't explain. Here, not even that. The caves aren't feared. They just weren't known. Here's a weirder angle. What if the caves were always meant to be erased? Some cultures built things to be temporary. Sand paintings, wood shrines, even some whole villages. The idea was that nothing should last forever. Maybe the builders of Longyou had a similar plan. Maybe the caves were for a special event, a single ceremony, a one-time gathering. When it was over, the caves were sealed, flooded, and purposefully forgotten. The water would hide them. Nature would do the rest. In this case, the forgetting is part of the design. The work itself is a message. This was for us, not for you. But again, nothing in the style or the carvings points to one-time use. The wear on the floors suggests people came and went, at least for a while. Let's bring in the idea of forced forgetting. In the study of memory, there's something called damnatio memoriae. That's a fancy Latin term for erasing someone from history. Destroy their statues, chip their name off the records, pretend they never existed. This happened in Rome, Egypt, even China. Maybe something like that happened with Longyou. The project was connected to someone who fell out of favour. After they were gone, everyone was told to forget. But even in those cases, the traces are obvious. You see hacked out names, smashed statues, altered texts, At Longyou, there's nothing to fix or hide. You can't erase what was never mentioned in the first place. Here's a different kind of theory. The caves were hidden not from people, but from the elements. Maybe their purpose was always to be secret, protected by water and earth. The builders knew the area would flood. Maybe they counted on it. Seal the caves, let them fill with water, and wait for the world to change. The project becomes an underground time capsule, waiting for someone to stumble onto it centuries later. If that's true, the erasure isn't about memory, it's about patience. The caves were never meant to be found until the right time. But then, why make them so big? Why put in all that effort if nobody was supposed to see them for hundreds or thousands of years? Let's talk about a theory that comes up a lot: outside influence. Some people suggest the builders weren't local at all. Maybe they were travellers, refugees, or even people from a lost culture. They arrived, did this one huge job and left. When they left, their knowledge and language disappeared too. The local people had no idea what the caves were for, so they ignored them. Over time, the entrances were hidden by water and dirt, and the memory died out. This happens sometimes in history. A new group moves in, finds something strange, and just leaves it alone. But in almost every case, some memory sticks around. A song, an object, a rumour. In Longyou, nothing. Now let's look at the idea of deliberate removal of records. In ancient China, scribes kept careful records. But there were times when records were rewritten, edited, or destroyed. Whole dynasties would rewrite the story of the past to make themselves look better. If the caves were built in a period that later rulers wanted to forget, the records could have been burned. Scribes could have been ordered to stay silent. But even then, traces usually survive somewhere: an old scroll, a forgotten letter, a family story. For Longyou, none has turned up. Not in local records, not in family histories, not even in far-off provinces. Let's pause a moment and talk about a stranger idea. Maybe the memory was wiped by accident. When people move, when cultures mix, old stories can get lost. Floods, wars, fires. These things destroy records, scatter families. Maybe the caves survived, but the story didn't. Maybe a disease or disaster cleared out the people who knew the truth, and the newcomers never found out. Over centuries, the land changed hands, and the caves slipped out of memory. This happened sometimes. But even then, you'd expect a few hints to survive. A strange word, a half-remembered story, something. Here, it's just a blank. Here's a theory that shows up in other parts of the world. Maybe the caves were made by people who didn't want to be remembered. Sometimes groups want to leave no trace. Outlaws, rebels, people on the run. They hide underground, do their work, and then cover their tracks. Maybe the caves were a base for a secret group, and when they left, they took everything with them. Tools, trash, even memories. Over time, nature hid the rest. This could explain the missing tools, the lack of records, the vanished stories. But it's hard to imagine a group big enough to dig out that much stone, yet careful enough to erase every trace. Let's switch perspectives. Maybe the forgetting happened slowly. Each generation knew a little less. The caves became less important, then just oddities, then nothing at all. Maybe people started using the land differently. New rulers, new crops, new ways of living. After a while, nobody cared about what lay underground. The entrances filled in, the water rose, and the story faded out. Sometimes history isn't erased. It just drifts away. But again, it's odd that nothing survived. Not even a myth. Another idea. The caves were built as a message for the future. Maybe the builders wanted to hide their knowledge until the right people came along. A kind of message in a bottle. Seal it up, let time do its work, and trust that someone would find it when the world was ready. Maybe the missing memory isn't a failure, but the whole point. The work was meant for us, not for them. But if that's true, what's the message supposed to be? And why no instructions, no clue, no sign saying open in case of emergency? Let's talk about erasure from a different angle. Language. Maybe the people who built the caves spoke a language nobody else understood. When their group vanished, so did the words needed to explain what they'd done. Even if later people found the caves, they couldn't read the marks or understand the carvings. Over time, the meaning was lost. But again, there's no real writing in the caves. No symbols, no names, no instructions. Just animals and chisel marks. So, if language was lost, it happened early and completely. Here's one more theory, and it's a weird one. Maybe the caves weren't supposed to be remembered by people at all. Maybe they were built for something else. Spirits, gods, ancestors. If the work was part of a ritual meant to be temporary, or sacred in a way that made talking about it forbidden, people might have made a rule. Never speak of this. Never write it down. Never pass it on. Sacred silence, kept for generations. If so, the forgetting is a kind of respect, a way of keeping the power of the place alive by not naming it. But if that's true, it's the best kept secret in history. Let's get practical for a second. Sometimes the answer is just bad luck. Maybe the people living above the caves weren't interested in history. Maybe they were poor, busy, focused on survival. When the people who knew the story died, nobody bothered to ask. New rulers came, new problems needed solving, and the old stories just faded. But even in places where people are poor or busy, stories hang on, people remember odd things. Oh, that pond. My grandfather said something strange happened there once. In Longyou, not even that. Now let's talk about the role of water. For so long, the caves were underwater, totally sealed off from view. Maybe that's the whole answer. Out of sight, out of mind. People fished the ponds, never knowing what was below. When the water finally drained, it was like finding a locked room in your own house. Maybe the memory was lost simply because nobody could see it. But even so, you'd think someone would be curious. Someone would poke around, try to explain the old steps, the odd shape of the ponds. But if they did, they left no record. Finally, let's ask the big question. Does it matter if the story was erased on purpose or by accident? Either way, we're left with a hole, a place where something huge happened and the memory is gone. Some people find this frustrating. They want answers, a neat solution, a reason for the silence, but maybe the message is that history is full of these holes, gaps left by time, or by people who wanted to hide, or by simple bad luck. What fascinates me about this is how much effort it takes to truly erase something. It's not enough to hide the entrances or destroy the tools. You have to erase the story from every mind, every scrap of paper, every line of gossip. You have to make the world forget, so completely that even the questions disappear. That's almost impossible. And yet, here we are, looking at a place where it seems to have happened. Maybe, in the end, that's the real power of Longyou. It's not just a mystery of stone and silence. It's a reminder that forgetting can be as powerful as remembering. That sometimes the biggest stories are the ones nobody tells, and that erasure, whether on purpose or by accident, leaves behind a different kind of monument. Not carved in stone, but in silence. And now, let's turn to the world above ground, the fields, the ponds, and the farmer who changed everything by draining that water. Because the story of Longyou isn't just about what's missing, it's about what was found. So what do we do with a mystery like Longyou? We've asked every usual question. We've looked for every scrap of evidence. We've turned the puzzle upside down, shaken it, and listened for loose pieces. Yet, instead of answers, we're left holding a kind of silence. Not just any silence, a deep one. A silence that feels heavy, almost chosen. Let's shift our gaze to what's happened since the caves were found. The world above ground has changed. The fields and ponds that hid these caverns are now famous. Tourists visit every year. Scientists come from all over. The local government protects the site and runs guided tours. The caves are lit with soft lights. There are walkways and signs. People take photos, whisper in awe, and leave again. But even with all this attention, the mystery remains. No new document has turned up. No local elder remembers a family story that explains the caves. Archaeologists keep digging, but the only things they find are more questions. Sometimes, the more we look, the stranger it gets. Now, here's a twist. Sometimes, a mystery becomes part of the place. The unanswered questions draw people in. Every visitor brings their own ideas. Some believe the caves are proof of forgotten genius. Others think they're a warning, or a message, or even a joke from the past. Local kids invent ghost stories. Some elders say it's best not to ask too many questions. Over time, the silence gathers new layers. The mystery itself becomes a kind of legend. Let's talk about what we do know. The caves were hidden for centuries. Farmers fished those ponds, never knowing what was beneath. Generations lived and died above the stone ceilings. The story was right under their feet, but nobody noticed. Then, one decision, a farmer draining his pond, changed everything. In a way, the mystery was always waiting just below the surface. We just needed the right moment to find it. There's a lesson here about how history works. Sometimes it's not about what's written down, it's about what we almost miss. The Longyou caves remind us that the past is full of surprises. There are always stories hiding in plain sight. Some are written in ink, others are carved in stone, hidden in darkness, waiting to be found. Think about the odds. What if that farmer hadn't drained his pond? What if nobody thought to pump out the water? The caves might still be underwater today. We'd walk over them, never knowing they existed. The silence would go on. The world is full of places like this, stories that are just one lucky accident away from being discovered. Here's another angle. The caves teach us about the limits of knowledge. We want to believe that with enough digging we'll find every answer, that history is a puzzle we can solve if we just try hard enough. But sometimes the records are gone for good. Sometimes there are no witnesses left. Sometimes a whole piece of the story is just missing. It can feel frustrating, even unfair. But it's also a part of life. Not every question gets an answer. In Longyou, the silence feels different. It's not just a gap in the record, it's a challenge. It pushes us to accept that some stories are lost, not because nobody cared, but because time itself erases as much as it preserves. The caves are proof that forgetting is as much a force as remembering. Let's get practical for a second. Since the discovery, teams have measured every inch of the caves. Laser scanners map the chambers in detail. Geologists study the rock. Engineers try to understand how the ceilings stay up. Every tool of modern science is thrown at the problem, but the basic facts don't change. The caves are older than anyone thought. The stone was removed by hand. The work was organized and skilled, and the record is still empty. The local community has changed too. What was once an ordinary village is now famous. The mystery brings visitors and money. Kids grow up hearing stories about the hidden world below. Some people are proud. Others are tired of the attention. But everyone agrees on one thing. The caves have changed how they see their home. The land feels deeper. The past feels closer. Let's not forget the human side. The people who built these caverns were real. They had lives, families, dreams. They worked in darkness. carving stone for reasons we may never know. Their hands shaped every wall, every pillar. They solved problems, argued, probably laughed and complained. Then they left, by choice or by force, by accident or by plan, and their story disappeared. But their work survives. It's strange, but sometimes the thing that lasts isn't the story, but the act itself. The stone remembers what people forget. Even when the reason is lost, the effort remains. That's true for Longyou, it's true for a lot of human history. Now let's take a step back. The Longyou caves aren't the only mystery like this. All over the world there are ancient sites nobody can fully explain. The Nazca lines in Peru, the stone heads of Easter Island, the underground cities of Turkey. Each one is a question mark in the landscape. Each one leaves us wondering, who did this? Why? How? Longyou joins that list. It's a reminder that our ancestors were capable of more than we usually imagine. Sometimes they left us puzzles we can't solve, but maybe that's the point. Maybe the value isn't in the answer, but in the search. The Longyou caves pull us out of our routines. They force us to slow down, to wonder, to imagine. In a world where so much is explained, a place like this gives us space to be curious, to accept that it's okay not to know everything. Here's something else to consider. In the end, every person who visits Longyou brings their own story. Some are looking for proof of lost civilizations. Some just want a good mystery. Some hope to catch a piece of the past that feels real and close. The caves don't give out answers, but they do give out wonder. That's rare. That's valuable. And in a strange way, the silence itself is a kind of answer. Not the one we wanted, but maybe the one we need. It tells us that not every story is ours to know. Some things belong to the past. Some secrets are kept by time, not by people. The caves remind us to be humble, to listen, even when we hear nothing. So as you think about Longyou tonight, remember this. Mysteries are part of being human. We build, we forget, we find, we wonder. And sometimes the biggest stories are the ones that slip through our fingers, the ones that make us stop and listen to the quiet. The Longyou caves are still there, waiting, watching, keeping their secrets. And maybe that's enough, because sometimes the silence is the whole story. Sleep well, may you dream of hidden places and the stories they keep.